Good afternoon, guys. Can we kick off? We'll have apologies again for Andrew Coventry, Lisa Beattie, Peter Boyce and Adam Montgomery now. The order of the business is as per printed, with one exception. To allow Ian Johnson away, I'm going to allow him to take planning and development, which is the last item of business first, if members are okay with that. Okay. Any declarations of interest at this stage? None. Okay, Ian, can we invite you to...
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for changing the order. I'm grateful to yourself and the committee for that. Just looking at the year 13-14 in terms of planning and development, the emphasis has been on the promotion and development of key priority objectives of the Council, and particularly in terms of planning and development, those relating to economic development and to positive destinations. They're functions which directly relate and impact to the economic, social and physical environments of our communities, and many of the services within or functions within Planning and Development Service relate directly to that. Probably just to pick out three themes. In terms of strategy, then the Midlothian Economic Recovery Plan is being prepared and is being implemented with a greater focus on those areas of activity which we consider would yield the greatest benefit in terms of economic development, business development and economic growth. The local development plan, which is now heading towards its proposed plan stage, which sets the agenda for decisions on land use and is very much hand in hand with the objectives of the Council in relation to economic development and other related aspects of developing communities. I would like to pick up on quality of service because of the number of regulatory services involved. We've had improved performance on development management in the handling of planning applications, and we've had a continued high level of performance in building standards. There's also been the commencement of the pilot partnership in relation to environmental health and training standards with that partnership arrangement with East Lothian Council, and we're having the initial review is currently taking place, with the full review at the end of the partnership period at the end of November this year. And finally, just want to pick up on partnership. We've seen the development instigated by the Council of the Easter Bush, or the Bush Development Board, which is really bringing together all of the partners at Easter Bush, that's the university and many of the others, to look at how to make sure that taking forward the development of that area for the bioscience and related industries and activities is not constrained and has a planned approach and is not held up by infrastructure constraints. In relation to the Dalkeith THI, the Townscape Heritage Initiative and Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme, that pretty much concluded during last year. It's being signed off now, and obviously we're hopeful we can take forward the sort of partnership lessons of that and the successes of that into what's happening at Gore Bridge. Just to look at 2014-15 and what the main aims of where we're trying to go with the service. Obviously the service has changed because it's now communities and economy and other functions have come in. And maybe just to touch on that, we're looking to drive forward a performance culture across the Council around a clearly expressed set of corporate objectives. And that's very much of a challenge for this year. Maintaining and improving the performance of the regulatory services, and that includes the environmental health training standards as well as the planning and building standards. And a focus on key targets, objectives in the Economic Recovery Plan, which is, in my view, owned by a whole range of services and certainly all of the functions in communities and economy. We're talking about supporting the primary sectors of our economic activity, which is things like tourism, bioscience, training and skills agenda, very much on the positive destinations side of things, infrastructure, and also development itself, particularly development of housing. And we've seen in the last few weeks the conclusion of the Section 75 for Shorefare, and we will see development at Shorefare this year extending forward. And with the Borders Rail line opening up as well next year, then finally we're seeing progress on that major development opportunity. Happy to leave it there, Chair, and for taking any questions from members.
Thanks, Ian. Questions, comments? Alec?
It's not a question, it's just merely to congratulate the Dalkeith Townscape Heritage Initiative on the work they've done. It's no a one-man show, but certainly the Rod Lugg should be minuted that we appreciate the work that he's done for. And if you've seen recently, they've just completed the Blossom Garden. What a difference spending a few bob and upgrading the business can do. And I just noticed here that they're putting scaffolding up at the Bank of Scotland. So it looks as though they're going to... It's not under the scheme, but I think it's more or less forced them to say, well, we better do something and upgrade their building.
Thanks for that. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I refer to page 113 of the agenda, the top item, to promote biodiversity in Midlothian. I'm quite concerned that, obviously in a time of cutbacks, we've lost our biodiversity officer, but my understanding was that responsibility had been passed on to somebody else. It seems that we're not being proactive in this area, and given some of the decisions in our planning meetings and our local review body, we've got absolutely no input whatsoever from any biodiversity expertise in the council. Indeed, I wonder at some of these meetings why we bother to have a local plan. We seem to go totally against it. Can you tell me what we're doing to rectify that in respect of biodiversity?
Chair, in terms of where we are with biodiversity, fully accept that the level of activity which we'd like to see there is not what I would like. But it's part of, in a sense, to some extent, we're slightly at the mercy of what's happened. We did have a biodiversity officer, and that person moved on to another post elsewhere. What we are doing is we're ensuring that in relation to meeting statutory requirements in terms of reporting, in terms of where we are with that, then we cover that. So we do the basics to make sure that the Council's on the right side of all of the statutory requirements. However, yes, it would be good to try and have a more proactive approach in relation to biodiversity. It is something which is currently under review. Clearly, you'll be aware that there is the Council's management review ongoing, and I think arising from that, there'll be opportunity to look at the way in which we're taking certain parts of various functions forward. And certainly I have been having some discussions with the team about how we can more appropriately use our existing staff resources to try and ensure that we do cover this area, which I openly admit is one that we have had difficulty stepping up to the plate on in the last year or so.
Any other questions for Ian?
Yeah, just following on, it should say that the biodiversity and the climate change kind of paragraphs. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are just basically financially driven projects, and it's difficult to have a spend to save because we didn't have the spend up front, and unless we get grant money in, you know, we can't really get involved in expanding a lot of these projects, if you want. And I'm just one thing I'm looking at more is biodiversity and the fuels that we use on heating and lighting our public buildings. The point I was really going to come at was the establishment and operation of a grants to communities panel. Can you give me a bit more information on this panel? This is on page 105, the fourth bullet point. And again, maybe the follow-up on that would be point 7 in the emerging challenges. How do you see this panel operating and working and partnership with the voluntary sector, but what council control is in there, because there will be a budget figure for that and presumably a reducing budget figure to that.
Just to pick up, Chair, on the biodiversity point, what I would say is that in terms of the biodiversity agenda, of course, there are a number of partners who we work with, the likes of SNH and others. So there is a collective approach towards biodiversity, but I agree that it would be helpful and beneficial for maybe the Council to have a more proactive approach, and I'll explain where we're coming from that. Also relating to things like heating and lighting, which you talked about, one of the areas which the Properties and Facilities Management Service is making quite a lot of progress is in relation to reduction of carbon emissions concerning the way in which we heat and light and provide power to council premises, and that includes local authority housing areas, housing as well. So just maybe to mention that. Coming on to the grants to communities panel. As part of the overall work stream which is being looked at in relation to services to communities, one aspect of that is to look at the grants which are dispersed to communities. And there is a grants budget which you'll be aware of, which the council has, and which it disperses grants to a whole range of community and other groups. The process by which that review is being undertaken is to have what I would call a co-production panel. That has met on a number of occasions. What I would say is that it's intended that a report will come before Council on the 24th of June, which will be setting out the process that's been followed in relation to the work so far on the grants to communities review. And so a lot of the answers to what you're asking there will be set out there. But if I can maybe just give a brief resume in answer to the specific question. The co-production panel comprises officers of the Council and a number of individuals from the voluntary sector who were invited on, and in fact the voluntary sector undertook their own assessment and their own ballot, I think, to decide who would be part of that co-production panel. And the benefit of it is that it means that those people at grassroots level and who deal day in, day out at community level can give some input as to how they see from their side of things the way in which the whole grants process works or doesn't work, or what could be improved. And also looking at things like the priority areas maybe for grants in terms of what's the most appropriate, best way of getting the maximum benefit for communities. It does not discuss individual groups and organisations, and it does not discuss the financing of individual groups and organisations. I need to stress that. But, Chair, this will be part of a report, as I say, that's due to come up to Council on 24th of this month.
Brian.
Yeah, look forward to that report because there's and as somebody that's been in the voluntary sector quite a considerable number of years, we're always concerned about some organisations are basically a lever, for other funds, and other, and some of them are very much contribute to our plan, and that if these organisations were cut or failing, then sometimes this could be a false economy. If you're not triggering in this extra resources, because it is very much a gearing effect. The squabbling will start on a lower budget. If there's not enough money to go around, I can see it being coming like that. As councillors, we always know about what's a bona fide and viable community group, to ourselves at the local level, and I'm just wondering about the input that councillors would have also within your panel. And I'm aware of the good work we do on the small grants, even the start-up grants panel and things like that. And I'm just obviously looking to see if this is getting merged into this, and if there's any also different funded scenarios for neighbourhood planning or any community planning or community councils, if this is also overlapping into any of these other areas as well. So I'm looking forward to your full report, and hopefully it will comprehensively include all the other things I've mentioned here.
Just to kind of echo Alex's comments about the Dalkeith Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme, the Gorebridge one that Rod Lugg is also involved in is moving on at a pace, and you've mentioned it in here. And the good thing about this is it's encouraging, I think, other activities to go, and you've mentioned the Gorebridge past, present and future. I had the pleasure of taking part in a bus trip on last Friday along with Rod and representatives from 20 representatives from a whole host of organisations, voluntary groups in Gorebridge. We went through to West Kilbride on the west coast to see what had happened there, while the demographics of that community is totally different from Gorebridge. How they had turned around their main street, which obviously this work is aimed at, was quite astounding. They had their own particular unique selling points, if you like, in terms of the craft side of it. It's all about specialising in that. But it certainly gave a lot of inspiration to the people that were there. So I think as a community we're going to get a much bigger payback than just, you know, the £600,000 worth of work that's being carried out in the community. I think it will be a lot more than that on the basis of what it can generate in terms of change to what is the centre of the village.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, with that, can I thank Ian for his report. Okay, we'll now move back to the agenda, which is item 4.4a, and that's adult and community care. Alison.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We'll run through briefly the information within this. The integration agenda is obviously key and critical to all of the areas that we'll go on to talk about. And I suppose the integration work is going on at a couple of different levels, both in terms of that strategic work with the development of the shadow board, appointment of the joint director and the co-location of senior management staff. But actually the integration agenda, as I run through the other items, is really clear in terms of that's the direction of travel across all of the areas that we're working within. Within older people's services, the dementia service is now co-located and jointly managed, based within Bonnyrigg. Lots of really good work there to ensure that we've got a single point of access for people within who have experience of dementia within Midlothian. The rapid response team is now being strengthened. From the beginning of January, we had the geriatrician who is now based within that team, and we're looking at getting advanced nurse practitioners. We're doing some consultation. That means in the not too distant future, we hope to be able to offer a much extended period of service as well. Our care staff within the rapid response team already work 24/7, but it's ensuring that some of the professional staff that can offer the backup to ensure that we get hospital discharges and we prevent hospital admissions can happen out with those times. So it's looking at an 8 to 8 service on a Monday to Friday and creating weekend working to ensure that actually at the times when we need to stop people being admitted to hospital, which is that evening and is that weekend, that we're able to do that more effectively with the right supports in the community. As this was an annual feedback, it was worth mentioning again Cowan Court as part of that and the impact that that has had, and that's really bedded in particularly well, and feedback that we had received from the tenants and residents of Cowan Court, that was a survey that was done towards the end of February time. It had exceeded all of their expectations in terms of what they were hoping for moving in, and had given them a level of independence that they, I think they'd hoped for but hadn't quite expected would be a reality as a case of the housing. Staff and family members have also reacted extremely positively to what's been happening there. Moving on to self-directed support, there was a members' briefing session at the beginning of April, just to give an update on that. That is now a really good piece of work that's happening between children and families and adult services in terms of how we change the way that we support people to be more in control of the way that they receive services. We have a board that's been developed which has user and carer representation, and there's been a really intensive period of training that's been rolled out for staff, both in terms of the principles of self-directed support, how we do the right support planning, and how we enable people to take risks in terms of how they manage and support themselves. Other pieces of work that have been really positive, the development of the Public Protection Unit, that's now been established with staff co-located in Brunton Hall. We're waiting for the dates for the MELDAP team to move in with them. They're moving in later on this month, and we're just waiting for confirmation of the police moving into that to ensure that we have a really comprehensive system that's looking at adult protection, child protection and violence against women. We were also successful in receiving a bid on a partnership basis with East Lothian and Women's Aid to create a SMILE project, which is £500,000 funding for the next 3 years for us to develop services in this area, particularly around things like employability and for people to be able to develop educationally and get the right supports in the community. We also are about to develop the Spring project from the Criminal Justice Service, which is based on the Willow project within Edinburgh to support women offenders it is also looking at people who will have drug and alcohol issues and who will have experienced violence against women. And again, that's about supporting women to get the best that they can to live well and get the right supports for them and their families. In terms of the challenges and risks, I would just want to flag that last time we're discussing the issues that we had in a couple of the care homes. It would be worth saying that the large-scale investigations for both of those care homes have now finished. We continue to monitor exceptionally closely within those care homes and had limited the number of admissions that could be made within a short period of time. We're still monitoring those and they're under review, but so far no issues have arisen following that period. In terms of the PI summary, I would only want to target one of them, which is on page 6 of the document, which is around absence. It has been a particular issue for us over the last couple of years, and we have met the target this year. So I felt I needed to point that out, as we haven't for the last couple of years. We have been struggling. There's been a lot of work that's been going on with the managers of services to do what we can to best support people to maintain themselves at work. Thank you. Enough questions?
Thanks, Alison. Joe?
Yeah, it's just a pity that we had to have some of our care homes involved in investigations. But congratulations to the foresight of the people who saw that the way forward for care for our elderly is the Cowan Court type of establishment for them. So credit for that's due, and congratulations for bringing these care homes back to investigations.
Any other comments, questions? None. Alison, thank you. We move on to housing and community safety. Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the performance over 13-14, there has been recognition from Inside Housing, the trade magazine. This is for the second year running, where we have featured in the top 50 UK Affordable Housing Development Awards. This year, that was in respect of the Eastfield project. The Council was also shortlisted for the UK Housing Awards as Strategic Local Authority of the Year. However, I'm afraid we didn't achieve an award at that event. In terms of CESPLAN, this is the South East Scotland Strategic Planning Authority. The housing need and demand assessment, which contributes to that submission for us as well as our neighbouring authorities, is due for submission to the Scottish Government at the end of this week. We've reported previously about the check and challenge process for the CESPLAN submission, and as I say, that is now completed and will be submitted, which takes account of all tenures of housing, both in terms of housing market, migration, and the needs and demands generally for the supply targets, which then informs our resources submissions through the SHIP that we have reported previously through the course of the year. I've then referenced partnership working, but Ian Johnson has tackled that. This was when environmental health and trading standards were previously under housing and community safety. Community safety itself, as has been referenced at the session this morning, their success in the reduction of antisocial behaviour with our community safety partners, and through the thematic group, the strategic assessment has been completed for the coming year in terms of the priority areas for the focus of the resource sharing with community safety partners, and the Safer Communities Board itself has made a number of submissions throughout the course of the year in terms of Scottish Parliament committees for the fire and police services after the first year of operation, after the implementation of the national services from the 1st of April 2013. In terms of challenges, well, again on the community safety theme, and members will be aware in terms of the licensing board that the licensing forum has been carrying out consultation in terms of the licensing policy statement for the 3-year period over 13-16 as required by the legislation. That has now been concluded, and the forum is in a position where it will now be making recommendations for the licensing board. Empty homes has again been a project which we've referenced in committee before. That's a scheme that has been launched in recent months, and is where we're attempting to bring into use private sector properties which are lying vacant
They have impacts for the owners in terms of council tax and security and potential for vandalism relative to the community safety agenda, but also to assist us in the housing services in the prevention and reduction of homelessness and making use of those empty homes which are across the Midlothian area. There has been a provision of £125,000 government loan facility, and we've estimated that 10 homes would be our target within the first year of this scheme, which would be provided for a rental period of 5 years, with the management being carried out through our partners with Dunedin Canmore Housing Association for this project. Welfare reform, the reference there is in terms of its impact on homelessness, and certainly we covered that topic under the revenues reporting for customer services this morning, but simply to flag up again, it's whilst we're implementing the mitigation actions that have been reported previously to Council through welfare reform, we do anticipate that there will be further challenges in the year ahead, and certainly in our preparation for the introduction of universal credit. Where the action is referenced here, and again I've reported to committee about the prospects for alternative bed and breakfast accommodation being displaced by direct provision from the Council, and I recall a question at the last PRS on that, and that particular report has since been submitted to Cabinet as reported here in April and is now out for community consultation process. And I'll pause there, Chair.
Thanks, Kevin. Joe.
Yeah, congratulations again for the award for the housing project at Eastfield. Credit again where it's due, convener, to the people who had the foresight to go ahead with this project.
Okay. Jim.
Yeah, the empty home scheme, Kevin, when did that start? Have we had any expressions of interest in that yet? And I presume, you mentioned, I think, Dunedin Canmore there, I presume if there's a requirement to lease these properties out as affordable housing over that 5-year period, that it wouldn't, that some support would be given to the owner of the property in actually managing these lets, because I can imagine it's one thing renovating the property, it's another having the responsibility that goes with letting it out. So I'm presuming that's the role that Dunedin Canmore will play in that.
Yes, that's correct. The empty homes scheme itself was launched maybe 4 to 6 weeks ago now. We did a mail shot making use of the available information from the council tax base about empty properties in Midlothian. So we've done a canvass through that process, and there has been initial interest. None that have yet been concluded, but there has been initial interest. You're correct in terms of Dunedin Canmore, who would help project manage for any works that are required to ensure that houses were at a habitable standard, and then subsequently for the housing management task would also be carried out through Dunedin Canmore. Yes.
Thank you, Kevin. Brian.
Yeah, just the rent controls, if you want, or the lack of rent controls that we have in the private sector. On the empty homes under Dunedin Canmore, it will be their statutory rents that's logged in, recorded, and but with other agencies like Orchard and Shipman and any individual landlords, is there any controls we can have on which is increasingly causing more and more difficulties, and I suppose for your number of people applying for rents as well, because the rent costs are astronomical for a lot of these private rented, including Orchard and Shipman. And do you have any control over or at all over a maximum rent for any of these properties?
Certainly, in terms of private sector rents, those are regulated to the extent that the local housing allowance is set. It's now set on an annual basis. It used to be reviewed on a monthly basis, but we have it set for the year for 13-14, and any contribution in terms of benefit entitlement is measured against the allowance, the local housing allowance itself, and any charge above that is then not met through benefit eligibility. That's the only form of control that we have through the local authority itself. I'm sorry, I didn't recall the other part of your question.
So when we use Orchard and Shipman, you know, can we have any say at all in the rent levels that Orchard and Shipman are charging? Because not all their clients are on benefits. You know, many of them people who are now accessing housing maybe even for the first time. I just wondered what kind of controls we'd have over that. And obviously, we've got a lot of maintenance issues with Orchard and Shipman as well. So it's both what kind of controls do we have over them on affordability and supposed repair and maintenance.
Certainly. In terms of the local housing allowance, that also applies to Orchard and Shipman because they're acting as agents for individual landlords, and as the managing agent they are also limited by that. The difference for Orchard and Shipman is that there's an additional management fee which is currently eligible for housing benefit purposes. That will change when universal credit is introduced, and that's causing us to review our whole rent strategy, both for ourselves in terms of our own stock, but also in terms of other providers in the area as well. That needs to be revised. Certainly in terms of your question on the maintenance, that has been addressed in recent months as there was cause to re-tender the private sector leasing contract, and certainly we ensured that the specifications tightened up because our experience was similar to Councillor Pottinger's in that there were complaints being brought to us in terms of housing management on a number of fronts, and certainly I have to say we have seen an improvement since the re-tendering in April of last year.
Thanks for that. Any other questions for Kevin? Okay, Kevin, thank you. Move on now to item 4B1, is children and families. Mary, are you taking these all?
Okay, children and families, the key points from this report is that our child protection figures have reduced over the year, but we still have spikes during the year, and we've had that for about 3 years. But we've worked with the national organisation called With Scotland, who found, as we did, that there's nothing wrong with our processes which leads to these spikes. You know, there's no additional police activity, there's nothing that explains the spikes, but it just happens. So our child protection figures are now more in line with the Scottish average, but again, you know, it can fluctuate during the year, but they're not as high as they were last year when we had 143 children on the register. We've not reached those peaks yet. Fostering and adoption service, it continues to improve with the addition of 8 new adopters and 8 new sets of carers in the year to April 2014. This has led to a reduction in the reliance of external carers. No child has been placed out with Midlothian in the last 18 months, and this keeps children and young people in touch with families, school and the local community. And last week I had the pleasure of going to the Foster Carers Barbecue, and it just makes your heart sing when you see these children who, you know, were described as having developmental delay, who, you know, weren't able to sit up at 10 months old, and they're running about all over the place. A little boy who was 2 years behind in reading and told they would never catch up with his classmates, who's already caught up with his classmates. And the youngsters are still in touch with their local community. I mean, it's just amazing. And listening to the foster carers who started off doing one thing and then are looking to adopt, you know, there's a power of work gone into that. So although I'm saying, you know, 8 new sets of adopters, 8 new sets of foster carers, there's a power of work has gone into that, you know, within the team. And the impact on the children for that is just amazing. Residential care, again, the use of Dalkeith House as a respite unit as opposed to bringing 4 children into care. If we bring 4 children into care, that's that unit stop. That's, you know, the youngsters will be there. But by using it in a different way, we've prevented 12 young people coming into care. So using it as an outreach, as a respite base, much more flexibly, it really has helped. And we're going to look at how we will use Dalkeith House, you know, in the future, in terms of youngsters with additional support needs. But that's, you know, for further investigation during the year. Positive destinations, all looked after young people. and looked after and accommodated young people are discussed locally at the forums to ensure that they have a pathway to positive destination is identified and that there is a lead professional taking forward with the school through care and aftercare, employment support teams, etc. Children and young people with additional support needs, again, you've heard me report many, many times about the costs for youngsters. You know, the minute we send them out with the authority, you're talking £100,000 minimum, up to £250,000. If we can work, you know, with our schools and keeping youngsters within Midlothian, along with the new eligibility criteria and the self-directed support payments, all of this supports our parents with children with additional support needs to really care for their children in the best way that meets their needs. Off target for us is sickness absence in our services, and there is robust monitoring there. And some child protection areas, if you look at page 51, again, we have always worked to, we will always go for a 100% target. We could reduce this and say, well, we'll make it to an 80% target, but for us, it's always about trying to meet the target of 100%. But if you've booked to have a child protection case conference and it's 1 day late, then it's off target, no matter if it's 1 day late. So it's within parameters, but we just want to keep working to that 100% target, and we'll keep striving for that. I'm happy to take any other comments about children and families.
Thanks. Any questions, comments? Tim?
Just a wee bit of the 100% targets, Mary. Would we not be better sort of, you know, recognising that you're not going to get there in one jump? Give yourself a genuine target to reach over the course of a year, rather than continually failing to meet the 100%, which is going to be difficult to get to, as just a kind of aside. Did I pick you up right when you said about the Children and Child Protection Register that we're getting around or towards or around the Scottish average? I think is what you said. But that, am I misreading what it says there then? Because it's talking here about Midlothian has 5.0 per 1,000 of 0 to 15 year olds on the register, compared with the latest published Scottish average of 3.0. That's 66% more in Midlothian than the Scottish average. Am I misreading that?
But at one point we were 10. Yeah, so we're getting nearer the Scottish average. Yes, so we're getting nearer the Scottish average. So at one point we were 10.1 children per 1,000 head of population, then we got to 7, and then we got to 5. So we're trying to keep those numbers. However, it's whether you think, and we've had this debate here before, the Scottish average is meaningful, because other local authorities don't register pre-birth case conferences. We do, and we've always done that, because that's your start of a child's journey, where you know that things are maybe going to go wrong. So we've always had registered pre-births, but other local authorities don't. So we've always put our figures in. The figures are figures, but you know, when your average is 10 and Greater Glasgow's 3, there's something wrong with how we're looking at figures, but it might not be us. Always there's, yeah.
Questions, Joe?
Congratulations again to Mary and her team for managing to keep the bairns in Midlothian. And for the use of Dalkeith House, the way it's by that running, that's another great idea that's come off well, I think.
Thanks, Joe. Anybody else? Okay, I think we've got to echo that sentiment that if you go back to where we were 5 and 6 years ago, where we struggled to get foster carers, and it wasn't just the fact that we couldn't get foster carers. There were foster carers in Midlothian. The fact was that a lot of them were going to agencies and costing the council an absolute fortune. There has been a lot of hard work over the last, I'm going to say 5, 6 years to drive recruitment and to show the benefits of fostering and that. And quite clearly you can see and you can hear from Mary that the results are paying paying off. That risk register's coming down to where we would hope it was always be. In fact, we could never understand why we were anything like as high, although we have had some of the reasons there. One of the things I would say is maybe worth maybe asking the Cabinet with their member to take up with the Minister, because quite frankly, I can't see how it's possible that local authorities are allowed to measure things in different ways when it's something as important as this. You know, I actually think that the Scottish Government should bring in legislation to say, here's how we're measuring these, and everybody's measuring them using the same rule of thumb, because quite frankly, it's a sort of step out of what you're saying is until the day the child's born, that child's no at risk. We've all seen cases where that's actually not the case. We've actually all seen cases, or no cases, where that's absolutely not the case. So I think if we're in agreement, we could maybe ask the Cabinet to consider asking the member for Health to raise that issue with the appropriate minister, or for the Council to raise it with the appropriate minister, and maybe argue strongly that every local authority with things like, because there's no difference in social work and children and families or that and East Lothian to West Lothian to Mid Lothian to Glasgow to Inverclyde. The reality is this is children's safety we're talking about, and the measurements should all be the same, so as we actually know where they are, and they should reflect what's the real risk, know what councils want to juggle about with them. Members okay that we ask the administration to give some consideration to that? Brian?
A bit of follow-up on what we were saying this morning, benchmarking as well. I mean, there are a lot of statisticians and a lot of people spend a lot of time, you know, in coming up with new benchmarking, you know, new statistics, the new dashboard, you know, that people can all access into, you know, to get them. But then again, it's how do you take them out, and what questions does it raise? Yeah. The particular congratulations on increasing the number of foster carers, you know, and the people in Mid Lothian, you know, that are fostering, you know, is an immense benefit, you know, to the child, you know, to the community, to our social work budgets, if you want, and none more so than emergency foster carers who will drop everything, you know, for the child, you know, that they're doing, and the emergency foster carers, you know, how do you benchmark them against just number of hours? You can't do that, you know, in that kind of category, because you know, it's just such a valuable service that these people are volunteering to give, you know, in the main instance, to helping and supporting children.
Okay, Jim.
Say one last thing, just to say that I think it's particularly good to see the very last point on page 41 there about this issue of reviewing the cases of the children that went into residential care, so that we can look to see, because I mean, if they're going into residential care at the end of the day, we've failed to some extent. It's great to be able to go through and review these cases to determine what could we have put in place that would have avoided that, and I think that's a really good exercise with really significant potential for giving us, you know, ways that we can avoid that happening in the first place. So I think that's a particularly worthwhile piece of work that's highlighted there.
This piece of research has provided really interesting information. That the mothers were young, that they were subject to domestic violence, that the youngsters were excluded from school on a number of occasions, and then were on part-time timetables. All of that, you know, was in these 6 children's cases. So although we were reacting to supports that were on, if you actually stand back and look at these 6 cases, this was youngsters at primary age that have gone in, that we're now saying until the end of their school career will cost us £1 million. So if we can say, okay, take one of these cases, what can we do, and bring that to children who are having difficulty now, which is why we're saying identifying youngsters, you know, in the Child Protection Register now, you know, pre-birth or just born, what supports are we putting in, and are they robust enough? So that's really what we're looking at. And just the other point about working to 100%, it's quite interesting. It's a stick to beat us with, because when the inspectors came, don't record that, when the inspectors came, they said, you're not even...
in mind it has been recorded.
Oh, it is. When the inspectors came, they did say, you're not even meeting your own target. And we're saying, yeah, because that's what, we've set ourselves ambitious targets that we know we'll never meet, but we will always strive to meet 100%. So it's quite interesting that did come back to us. But it's kind of, if you set it at 90% or 85% and it falls below that, is that acceptable? Do you know what I mean? And then it starts to slide another 5%, you think, well, so we wrestle with that. We do every year, I have to say.
Okay. Members content, and we're content with asking the Cabinet Member to consider writing to the Ministers. Yep. Okay with that? Okay. Thank you for that. Communities and support, Mary?
Okay, the key successes there, the early years collaborative work continues to develop, and it includes the Big Bedtime Read, which, as you know, has been welcomed nationally and indeed internationally. Bookbug and PEEP programmes that we work in our communities with have been very successful, and we've got a worker specifically to work with our looked after and accommodated two-year-olds on literacy and numeracy. So there's a whole lot of work going there on the Early Years Collaborative. In terms of family work, we've run a number of parenting courses across Midlothian, from Incredible Years, which targets 0 to 5, Raising Children with Confidence, children 5 to 11, and Escape courses for parents of teenagers, but also teenagers. So it's a course that targets both. And as you can see from the numbers taking part, these courses are well received. Working with young people, working with young people, as you can see from the report, are open for young people, and it continues to grow with over 1,100 awards given this year, including our first ever Platinum Award for youth work for a young woman that got that. So that's contained on page 61. In terms of adult learning, we have live IT sidekicks in libraries. We have computing for the over 50s and CLD. We have weekly job clinics with the SDS Scotland and CLD, and a big lottery award of £70,000 over 3 years to get people back into work. Libraries, we received an award for Library of the Year, and we beat Birmingham Council, one of the biggest libraries in Europe. The PEEP and Bookbug courses, again, are well attended, and Love Your Library Day, again, which was well attended, and the science activities within libraries as well. Other services which support frontline services are set out on page 62, and that is the supporting schools, the opening of Rosewell Primary School Extension, the Roslin Primary School work about the dog grids, Kings Park Primary School, the new classroom is created, and the performance and planning team. All of these reports wouldn't be as good without the performance and planning team, which plays an integral role. The team has prepared reports for the multi-agency inspection, the new battle catchment schools, and the school leaver destinations. Excuse me. So there's lots of work going on in terms of communities and support, but some of that then now fits with different directorates. One of the biggest challenges we've got is the subject access requests, and that's where young people over 18 can apply to access their records. And across the authority, there's only 4 across the rest of the authority, whereas we've had 16 in the period of 6 months. So a youngster that's been in care, say at Midfield when they were 12, they're entitled to all of their records. They can ask to get all of the records, which you've got to print off, you've got to find them, you've got to print them off, then you've got to redact anything on them. So it's a huge, intensive piece of work. Also, the thing that concerns me is a number of our youngsters are maybe 18 requesting these reports, which are perfectly entitled to, and we get it out within the 40 days if we're lucky. Do we just hand it to them? You know, so you've got a youngster who's really trying to work out where they belong in life, how they arrived at where they've arrived at, and they receive their package on a Friday, which can be like this. That, you know, for me, it's more than just a subject access request. It's how we sit with that young person and work through the paperwork, and they don't just get a pack on a Friday afternoon and then, you know, go off the rails at the weekend because they've been rejected by their parents. You know, they've had 2 foster care placements that really didn't work out well, and you know, things like that. So it's not just about the subject access request. There's a whole care and welfare issue about these youngsters, you know, getting their reports. So that's a big challenge for us. But I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mary. Brian.
Libraries, Mary, I think we've been a bit too modest in the report, just to say we've been shortlisted for awards. Right, I think the report could have been updated, you know, to talk about the successes, the awards that we've been achieving. And obviously I'd like to congratulate all the staff that's, you know, formally been involved in that, you know, because it is a major success to win it, you know, and when you're up against libraries like Birmingham City, you know, I think the biggest library in Western Europe, you know, that you're up against, and to win it, and obviously a lot of the good work that you talked about before, on the page before, on the book mug and the PEEP kind of stuff. I mean, this is all contributing to an excellent library service that we're given, and long may it continue. I'd like to say that on the Soccer City, you know, partnership work. I think that's great because they've reinvented dance up there. You know, the youngsters find it's really cool to go up there. In my day, it was they used to call it break dancing. You know, I think they call it street dancing now. Yeah, but the number of smaller ones that's participating in that is quite large, and it's a big uptake and a big demand for this in a physical activity of people there. And Newbattle High School has its benefits from this Soccer City as well, because now Friday is the best attended day, you know, at Newbattle High School, as they all prepare to finish early on a Friday and go straight to Soccer City. And so it has its overlaps into education as well. Thanks.
Mary.
Just to say, this report was to the end of March, and the Library Award was won earlier on, so you are kind of reporting backwards and forwards as well. But yeah, I take your point, yes.
Joe.
Yeah, just once again to congratulate Mary and her team. I handed awards to the adults with literacy problems in Dalkeith Library, and it was great to hear how the people were coming on. And I also gave out awards to the mothers who had taken part in the early years collaborative and attended with the Danish ministers who came over to see how this project worked. And it was great to hear the young mothers and the success that was having within their families, and the time it was giving them to have time for themselves when they didn't have that before. So, good work, Mary.
Ian, sorry.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, I'm always impressed at the initiatives the libraries are carrying out. Always, whenever I see these newsletters and that, there always seems to be so many things going on. I think tremendous, particularly as the libraries are embedded within the communities. Just a couple of brief questions. You mentioned about the subject access requests. We've seen a surge in these. What do you attribute that to? Is we're getting round that youngsters have the right to this information? And the second question is, maybe you're the wrong person to ask this, but I'm intrigued by these pioneering dog grids. I must go down to Roslyn Primary to see what they're like. I don't know if what they are and whether they can be incorporated in other parts of the community.
In terms of pioneering dog grids, I don't know, honestly. I couldn't even possibly make it up. In terms of subject access requests, all youngsters on leave and care, you would be speaking to them about their entitlements and whatever. And part of the discussion that young people might have with their through care and aftercare worker is, I want to see my records. in which case they're entitled to do that. But I would want to see that in a more supportive way, rather than I just want to see my records, you know, because looking back it's very difficult, and youngsters really have to try to make sense of their journey and how they've arrived at where they've arrived, and to get a package on a Friday afternoon or a Monday afternoon, you know, saying wee Johnny, you know, was a nightmare in school, and, you know, all of this sort of stuff, you know, they're entitled to it, but I think there's a sensitivity around that. So legally we have to give them it, but I think we need to be advising their through care and aftercare worker to sit down with them and go through some of that, and even having the person who does the subject access request, they have to redact anybody else's name or anybody that's not related to them. But my view would also be to give a summary for the young person. So here's how you've arrived at where you've arrived at, and with a bit of sensitivity, rather than, you know, piles.
Sorry, can you just come back? Yep. Yeah, I'm just wondering if they've always known that they have the right to this, why there's a sudden increase. Is there something that's changed that's resulted in so much time having to be given now towards providing them?
I think we've always had a number of subject access requests, but normally it's if a parent's got a complaint, you know, with the system. So say someone went on the Child Protection Register 3 months ago, somebody asks for their records. So we've always had a number of these where people have been entitled to it. But I think it's just the number of kids now coming through the system, you know, that are finishing off. So,
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, just following on to what was said about Soccer City, it's interesting, you know, that it's not always appropriate to deliver something as a diversionary thing from council premises. It's sometimes, for the point of view of genuine engagement with youngsters in particular, moving out with the normal environment to offer activities like that really works. And I keep heading towards the challenges rather than the positives here, but I'm pleased that there's a recognition in the actions on the challenges that there's a requirement to bend the spend in order to make sure that the resources are available to fund initiatives like the Soccer City thing. And I think it does sort of point to illustrate some of the discussions we've been having in other quarters about bending the spend, because it's not always the council that provides diversionary services as well. It can be provided by, that kind of activity can be provided by members of the community that require the support to be able to do that as well. So I'm pleased that we're recognising the requirement there to bend the spend.
Okay, thank you. No other questions in this matter? And last for the afternoon is item 3, which is education. Mary, you have the floor to yourself.
Well, just to say that Midlothian did win the M Factor, and we got a COSLA award for the M Factor, and in fact we're just completing the Moscars. The young people have been involved in doing that at the moment, and I've been invited to that on the 17th of June. So in terms of, we've talked earlier on about the Early Years Collaborative. Again, it goes across education and children's services. But the 3 biggest areas over the last year in terms of education is the implementation of the 600 hours nursery provision for 3 and 4-year-olds, and planning for the implementation of nursery provision for looked after twos and children from workless households. So this is a huge piece of work that was a bit difficult at the beginning, because although the Scottish Government has said, you know, we want 650 hours, 600 hours nursery provision, we didn't actually have what funding we were going to get originally. So we've had to kind of work, you know, as we're sort of waiting on this sort of financial outcome from the Scottish Government, and we're still waiting on that for the looked after twos and children from workless households. So at the moment, the implementation of the 600 hours for 3 and 4-year-olds is going ahead. The looked after twos, we're still working towards that with an implementation date of August. And we're working with our partnership nurseries, Sure Start, Hawthorn Children's Centre and whatnot, to see what provision we can have. But again, we don't know the financial settlement, so we don't know just quite what it is. Implementation strategies for raising attainment and achievement of children and adults. You know that Peter McNaughton and his team have been working incredibly hard on that, really building up the leadership of head teachers, both nursery, primary, secondary, to drive that forward. And the inspection reports in the last year for primary, secondary, nursery and partnership centres have been very positive, but we need to continue in relation to improving curriculum for excellence and implementation of national qualifications, and improving positive destinations for all young people. We're working with all high schools and a range of partners to plan and implement the positive destinations policy and plan this year's improvement. This year it shows that there's still work to be done, but we need to ensure that our youngsters leave school with a positive destination. I'm happy to take any questions. Excuse me.
No, we're not. Go for no. Okay, questions, Brian?
With any new legislation or any new policies, you know, the funding has to follow, you know, from the people making the policies. And obviously these policies and the 600 hours care is not just about the money following it, it's also about the assets. And I just wonder if there's any difficulty with either of those subjects, or challenges, if you want to call it that, within your reporting scenario. Also on the I'll talk slowly so you can recover. Also on the free school meals. Obviously, totally welcome free school meals. You know, been campaigning for that for a long time, and now it's starting in January. Again, my question would be about: do we know we're getting additional funding now? I mean, this is going into place in January. You know, it's not far away. And do we have enough places in the dining halls? You know, do we have the assets also for the increased take up there will be of school dinners? So it's just a question on funding and assets. And do you know, or do you know when you will know?
Start with the second part first. In terms of the implementation of the free school meals, I have it on good authority that we're well placed to be able to deliver the free school meals for P1 to P3 in our schools, because, excuse me, our uptake of school meals has been 85%. We're one of the top performing local authorities. And when I got the report back from Norman Cato about what we needed, it was things like additional crockery and cutlery, and I'm going, yeah, but you know, do we need, you know, more ovens or more whatevers? But we've got that here in Midlothian, so we're actually well served in terms of the implementation of free school meals. The implementation of 600 hours, I think, is we've got two challenges here. Is it just we want to deliver 600 hours nursery education, or is it we actually want to change the way we deliver services? So we've got a two-pronged approach. At the moment, we're implementing the 600 hours in Midlothian. We've delivered it here. We've delivered a seminar on how it's going to be delivered. But that's only for 2 years. It gives us a bit of breathing space to say, what do we want in Midlothian? Based on that policy, which is a good policy, but what do we want? What provision do we need? How do we help workless parents get back to work? And it's not by providing nursery that fits in with school hours. It has to be flexible. You know, we need to be looking at, you know, if we want people to get back to work, what do they need? So we'll have a bit of breathing space. We've got the policy, we're implementing it, the 600 hours for 3 and 4-year-olds from August. And we'll have to deliver the workless households and the looked after twos by August, but we're going to have a sort of mixed economy there. But it gives us it gives us a breathing space to really deliver or really develop over the next 2 years. In terms of the funding, because I saw you going like that, in terms of the funding, we now have the settlement for the 3 and 4s. We don't yet have the settlement for the 2 and 3s, the looked after 2s and the workless households. There was a meeting at COSLA on Friday where it was raised. So for us, we're having discussions with people like Sure Start, with Hawthorn Children's Centre, say, yeah, you know, we could offer 10 places, or we could offer, you know, so many places. But until we know what the settlement is, it's very difficult for us to say, yeah, just you go out and recruit 3 members of staff. Oh, by the way, the settlement only allows for 2. But we're working with our partners. And the good thing about Midlothian is that our partnership centres, we do work together. So we will have a mixed economy across Midlothian in terms of implementing that policy. So it might be that a parent who lives in, I don't know, say Roslin, could go to Little Forest Nursery. So the 600 hours might not be through a school nursery, but it might be through Little Forest Nursery, but she would only get 2 days or 3 days for her 600 hours, as opposed to you know, having 5 days. But what we want is to build that flexibility. And the other thing that I was just speaking to Jim about this morning, we need to think about, if we're building new schools with nurseries attached, do we build school nurseries, which are open from 9 till 3 or 8:30 till 4 as it is in the new bit, or do we look at them as community nurseries that would be able to offer that wider bit? So there's a lot of work to be done, but we need to be thinking ahead of what is it that we want in Midlothian in terms of early years provision. And that will impact on our child protection, it will impact on our looked after children, you know, it will really have benefits.
Chair Mary, I know I'm going to ask a question I've already actually asked you today, but I think it would be beneficial for everybody else to hear the answer to it anyway, because I've been asked by a couple of people about it. And it's about the hours. We had the seminar, the 600 hours. We had the seminar where it was explained about the consultation, and I think I asked the question at it about, you know, the preferred delivery model. Was it overwhelmingly supported or not? And I've got assurances that it was of 70% sort of support for that particular thing. But nowhere in that report was it indicated about the hours, the actual starting and finishing times. And it's certainly been raised some concerns, because we've moved. The core reason for the nursery education is obviously early years intervention, you know, getting youngsters prepared for to be in a position where they can go off to a flying start at primary school. So you're preparing them for that. But obviously, part of the rationale for funding the additional hours and the projected eventual additional hours that we're looking at is to get women that are potentially economically active back into work. So the practicalities of that are obviously important, and for fear of getting a row for the chairman, I'll not go into all the issues about whether there's enough economically active women, potentially economically active women in Scotland to fund that kind of thing. But you know, can you just maybe explain why we are in a situation where, in some instances, we're talking about starting the nurseries at 8:30 in the morning, when the school's only starting till considerably after that?
Yeah. In order to implement 600 hours within the school term, it has to be a session of 3 hours and 10 minutes. And you also need a clearing up time in the middle. So youngsters leave the nursery, you're able to clear up, and staff have a break, and then youngsters come into the afternoon session. So it's a morning session and an afternoon session of 3 hours and 10 minutes, and that's how you fit in your 600 hours. For parents who have other children who want to drop them off for school at 10 to 9 and don't want to be going to school too early, there's a core half hour, so that 8:30 start in the morning, parents can drop the child off at 8:30 in the morning, or they can come any time between 8 and 9 if they've got other children they need to drop off. So if you've got 3 kids, as I didn't want to be dropping my child off at nursery at one time and my 2 children off at school or hanging about the playground. So that's how it fits. That's how it's the 3 hours and 10 minutes fits. Now, it's on a Friday afternoon as well. We have the asymmetric week in Midlothian. We offered parents the opportunity that the hours could be fitted in during holiday times. So parents, instead of having it just during the school term, there would be an entitlement. They would have the school term time that they went for the 2.5 hours, but they would be entitled to holiday cover. But we weren't able to guarantee where that holiday cover would be. So parents were saying, well, I live in Bonnyrigg, I really don't want to go to Dalkeith to get my 2 hour, my entitlement of that. So it was trying to work out all of these permutations. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. It's to fit in the 3 hours, it's to fit in the 600 hours within the school year. And that's how it works out at 3 hours and 10 minutes.
I'm not sure if I actually understood that answer, Mary, because I'm just trying to work this out, so I wasn't privy to your talks this morning, but if it's 3 hours and 10 minutes, why can the nursery no start at 10 to 9 and finish at 12 o'clock instead of starting at 8:30? And there's a pile of other issues in there that we've got to look at. This isn't just about working mothers and that, this is about people who are travelling by car and stuff like that, and starting to try to get people to walk and to cycle to work. If you have to walk and there's any bad weather whatsoever, there's no a chance of you going to walk down to the school for 8:30 for the nursery to start and then stand about there till 10 to 9 till the school goes in. Or are you actually saying that the kids that are at the primary school can go in at 8:30? I'm not actually sure what that answer meant there.
Right. What I was saying is, if you're a mum with a child who's going to nursery, who's entitled to go in at 8:30, and you've got a wee one who starts school at 10 to 9, you could actually bring your nursery child later to nursery. There's going to be a core time that the youngsters can be in nursery, but there's a flexible nursery time. So that was your first part of your question.
Sorry, before we move forward then, how are they then getting the extra time, or are they getting to stay later?
Right. Right. The second part of your question was, why do we not have the afternoon session longer? It would mean, if you did that, kids would not be finishing nursery till after 4:30 in the afternoon. Okay, if we made the session from 10 to 9 till 3 hours and 10 minutes, then you've got the break, then you would have the children coming in the afternoon would not be finishing till 4:30, and parents felt that was too late.
So you're stuck at the start, or you're stuck at the bottom. Okay. It's a bit strange. It's a bit difficult for parents, because I suppose what we're going to hear from you is that the parents who would rather start a bit later are going to be unhappy, and if you shift it anywhere, I thought it would be the ones that start or finish a bit later are going to be unhappy. Okay, right, Jim.
So effectively, the scenario you just described, that person's child would be forfeiting that 20 minutes for their education. That's really what you're saying. They're coming in 20 minutes late. That would be, they wouldn't get the full 600 hours by choice.
Okay. Any other questions for Mary? Ian?
Thanks, Derek. As part of the budget changes this year, there was a plan to reduce the number of learning assistants by 10 to 10.5, I think it was. Can you give us an update on how that's progressing and what the impact is?
Yes. What's happened is schools, I think I've explained, schools get an allocation. So they get a core allocation based on the pupil numbers. They get an additional allocation based on SIMD, the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, and they get an allocation based on their ASN resourcing. So what's happened now is that our staff have gone round to all of the schools and worked with all of the schools about what their allocation is. So we have learning assistants who are on temporary contracts, so some people's contracts won't be renewed. So all of the schools are clear about what resource they've got moving forward in the coming year.
Sorry, so you've gone around all the schools and you've presumably used some sort of formula to work out how many they should be allocated. What happens if that number is greater than the number that we have before or after removing 10 learning assistants? Or is it a case of it's the top, so many get priority?
Sorry, Ian, I didn't...
Sorry, no, I'm saying you've gone around all the schools to see what the allocation should be according, presumably, to some formula, taking these into account. What happens if that comes up with a greater number of learning assistants than we've got the money to pay? So, you know, if we're cutting the number with, by 10 and a half in total in Midlothian, then that suggests that there's an allocated pot of money for learning assistance. There's a certain number that we have in Midlothian, and if we need more than that, then tough. Is that correct?
No, the 10, it was 10.14 or something, learning assistants, which was equivalent to less than a third of a learning assistant per school. Do you know what I mean? So that wasn't a huge cut, but what we were trying to do was, in the past, what happened was, you could have a learning assistant in a class who was there to support the class, but you could also have a learning assistant that was allocated to be Johnny, and a learning assistant was allocated to be Jeannie through the ASN budget. But the teacher, as teachers would, as head teachers would, could use that flexibly. So, you know, we Johnny and we Jimmy didn't need actually somebody all the time, so that person could be in P6. You know, they could be supporting the P6 class. So it's really about head teachers using the resource that they've got flexibly, rather than it being attached to a particular child. This is the resource that's required by your school, and you use it as you see fit.
Right, but sorry, it's still not clear to me, because if you've gone around the schools and worked out that there are so many learning assistants that they need, according to these different categories that you mentioned, and what happens if that means that, say for argument's sake, we need 30 learning assistants in Midlothian, but we've only got the budget now for 25? Who loses the 5? But we would only have the 25, we wouldn't have the 30 that's deemed necessary according to the formula that's being used. Well,
I would think, Ian, what you're talking about here is the fact that if a school, we'll call it Monarch Primary School, they've got 0.5 a learning assistant too much. If they can't get rid of that, I would imagine they'll use their devolved school management budget to pay that, or maybe make savings for other areas until such times as that falls down below and rises back up. I think that may be the answer to your question, that it would then be the school's responsibility to make sure that the balance their books in that way.
If that's the case, yes, that would answer my question.
Any other questions for Mary? Thank you, and thank you for your attendance.